optimistic. We think it's all going to be okay. It feels really weird to be doing anything today, really, because I know there's just a lot of concerns. I think we're all sitting, you can't help but sit there and think about how things could fall apart for everyone in your family. You know, this daughter lives here, and this is what's going to happen, and it's going to cascade down. And so I get that, but we are going to try to talk about, and this is more than just regular marketing, but more general communications. I've done this version of this presentation before for the, you don't even know this, Dwayne, for the Securing the Future conference that happens every year. I did one for them about 5 years ago, and that's geared heavily towards the government and nonprofit sector. So, strangely, this presentation is called Is There Anybody Out There? Which is also a weird question. One of my daughters who lives in Berlin just sent me a picture of, I just saw before I stood up here, of an totally empty transportation system. So, from earlier today. So that's kind of, she's had to go back and forth for some reasons to the home immigration office. So she had to go today, and that's kind of a stunning photo. One thing I'm going to do today is, since we're a small group, usually I do this and then we take questions. If you guys have questions throughout, just ask them, okay? So is anybody out there, the premise is really, and keep me on time. I mean, I usually don't talk too terribly long, but is anybody out there is really, who's out there for you and who is your audience? And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is really about audience and why it's important to understand your audience and why it's important to understand how best to speak with your audience. I also have a tendency in communications to talk about communicating with, not communicating to. There's a big tendency to talk about, I'm going to talk to Suzanne, I'm going to talk with Suzanne. Talking to Suzanne is lecturing. Talking to is engaging in a conversation, and what we all really want from our audience is engagement. So I know it sounds a little juvenile, but it's true, and I think we all have a tendency to do this. Okay, there's a big guy I used to do a lot of work with, and he's got a firm in New York, and his tagline, and he's been highly successful, is knock hard, life is death. I think that's not very politically correct, but there's some truth to it, and it's really about breaking through. And we're going to talk about how to be heard, and that is how to ensure that who you are, whether you're a person, whether you're an organization, or whether you're a cause, because we're all those things at any one time, how to ensure that what it is that you want the public to understand about what you're doing is actually received by them. So the first thing you have to do, and these are things that we all know, but frankly, even when I was redoing this, I did a special review of this just for today. When I was reviewing it, some of these things, most of these things never really change. I mean, this is all, unlike everything out in the world that we think is changing, basics of messaging and communications 101 are probably still the same as they were in 1600. We just have different vehicles right now. Some dangerous vehicles, actually. First thing you need to do is you need to find your people. You need to know where your people are. Your people are the people who you need to leverage in order to be successful. So, if I'm a toilet paper manufacturer, my people are going to be everywhere, but my most important people right now are going to be the people where there's a shortage and how I'm going to communicate with them. Find the people who you want to be your people. And a lot of this is about research. So where are those people? Where are the people who might be predisposed to liking what you're doing, to participating in it, but aren't? So where are those people? And there is a big research component on this. Find out where they are. Research is third. That's really taking a look at the overall marketplace that you are in and making sure you have a deep understanding about it. You're going to hear me say over and over and over today, it's really about the audience. It's not about me, it's not about you, it's about well, today you're my audience, but in general, it's going to always be about the audience. You need to know what your audience consumes. And by this, I mean, does your audience read the newspaper? Does your audience ride public transportation and look at the transportation advertising vehicles? Do they watch TV? Do they watch Netflix? Do they spend a lot of time on the internet? Are they sports fans? This is all in the research. So you need to deeply understand where they're getting their information. This isn't what they're eating, this is where they're getting their information. You also need to know when. And this is a big problem that a lot of people face with social media. It's not all created equally in every day part. There are certain times of the day when you're going to be more likely to be heard, and you can figure this out some with your own behavior. When you're on the internet, when you're paying attention, when you put up a post, when you get a lot of responses to a post, when you don't. It's not always about the post, sometimes it's about the time. So just remember that. It's not, every part of the day isn't created equal no matter what you're doing, but your people, your audiences are going to have certain patterns. For example, if you have a lot of third shift audiences, middle of the night might be a good time. If you have a lot of regular working people, 9 to 5, if you have a lot of moms, you need to take into account all those things, and sometimes that gets complicated, but you do yourself need to kind of diagram that out so you're figuring it out. Don't worry about my sniffing and germs, I promise it's seasonal allergies. And do you and your audience understand one another? And this is important. So most of you are probably in some kind of leadership role in your organization. And your audience needs to really understand kind of who you are and what you're about. And this is why if you're a hiring manager, the people representing your organization to the public need to be people who the public feels really represent that organization right. There shouldn't be a big disconnect there, or they're not going to come off as credible or believable. And then again, it's almost like finding a spouse. Do you and your audience, do you get each other? Do you get each other or not? But it's up to us to get our audience, not our audience to understand us. When you locate your people plus others, the first thing you need to decide is how to deliver your message. And we're going to talk a little about messaging today, because messaging, whether it's marketing or public relations or communications 101, is all about the message. You need to determine how to deliver your message. And this is your tone. And not everything's written in this presentation. I just did enough so I can keep us going. And the 4 points matter. And here's what I'm going to say about the 4 points. I was lucky enough to do a whole lot of work with a guy named Michael Sheehan, who was Bill Clinton's original messaging coach. Now, I think most of us are old enough in here. Raise your hand if you remember pre-1988 when Bill Clinton was a horrible speaker and didn't deliver his messages right. Does anyone besides me remember this? Okay, we have two. He was terrible. And I was at that Democratic National Convention when he was terrible and they pulled him off the stage. Terrible, terrible. Terrible, then he went on Arsenio Hall, and then he did some things, and all of a sudden he was getting better. Well, there's a guy who worked with him named Michael Sheehan. He's a Washington guy who spent a lot of time basically with Bill and Hillary, more so Bill. And he told him and taught him 2 things. You need a core message point. This is, if I were messaging about myself, let's say my core messaging point is, I'm a female who lives in Cincinnati. And then the second one would be, I like to wear the color turquoise, or the first message. And the third would be, I'm 56.8 years old. The third might be I'm a mother, and the fourth might be I'm vice president of community shares. So you never go off those messages, ever. So about your organization, you need to have the core set of organizational messages that are always about you. And we'll talk about for a minute. But then let's say you're going into a fundraising campaign and you need to talk about some other things. Let's say it's Suzanne and Planned Parenthood, and they've had some issues lately with some of the stuff in the national news, so they have to weave some other things into their campaign. For the campaign, that's okay to do that. But you always have to go back to what you are at your core. Now back to Bill Clinton for a minute. If you look at Bill Clinton when he got better, when he was president, there aren't many people who were as good as he was. And if you look at news clips of him from the old days, because these are the old days, I watched a 1991 trailer of a movie the other day, and I felt like I was watching something from the 50s. I mean, I realize 1991 is the old days, but if you look to the old days of Bill Clinton and some of the original days when he was president, any meeting, news conference, anything he'd be in, he kept going back to the same messages. He never sounded redundant. So this four messages thing, you also have to practice. I spend a lot of time with my clients practicing, going back, and that they have to, every time they're answering a question, they have to stay on message with the elements they were provided for. Does everyone understand this? Politicians are generally pretty good at it, except when I saw on TV the other night, he wasn't so good. When he was in the Oval Office talking about the coronavirus. That wasn't an example of good messaging, but I guess I'm showing my politics a little much today. But politicians are good. Barack Obama was very good. But if you want to really watch people in action, there's a number of people out there. But Bill Clinton was he was having a hard time coaching Hillary, and couldn't get her to stay on message. And I think some of that might have come through when she was running. I mean, not everyone wants to communicate this way. So if you look at basic message modeling, you have a few components. You have the middle, which is your message, with everything right around you, just like we talked about. And you have the sender, and that's you, and you have the receiver, and that's the listener and the audience. So it's important, again, to remember that there are at least two people in every communications. It's never a one-person gig. So you need to work it. And by this means sender, me, sends it out, and I encode it so that it's going to make sense. I deliver the message, and then you're decoding it, and you're receiving the message. Then the receiver decodes it, offers feedback to their audiences, encodes it, and then it's sent out again. Yeah, I mean, it's important, it's basic stuff, but I can't tell you how important it is. And it is basic, but I've been doing this, I realized, 35 years the other day, and I still have to remind myself often. What makes me the craziest is when I can't get my own family to message. Saying, okay, you're gonna go talk to your boss. This is what you say. You just don't go in and start firing off what you think about something. This has to be a messaging exercise. You're going to talk to your boss. You're going to meet with your board. It always is a messaging exercise. So I'm going to talk about amping it up. I used to kind of call this going viral. I don't remember if I put a going viral slide in here today, because I wrote this a week ago, but viral is a bad word today. So amping it up, and that is really about social media. And today you can utilize lots of social media platforms to really get your message out there. Now that doesn't mean just putting your message everywhere. It means engaging with people on the other end. So that means if it's a Facebook, you're engaging with your public, they're saying something about it. That's kind of how you can tell if it's working or not. Or known as likes. Twitter, is it being retweeted? I mean, and not everything's gonna do great. I also guard against overusing this. I don't think any organization should be putting out more than 3 a day unless they're in some kind of a crisis. Because you're gonna lose people, they're gonna get bored with you, they're gonna start ignoring your stuff. We all know a lot of people in organizations who constantly are putting it out there. Like the CDC right now, they have permission to put it out there 5 times an hour if they want to, because what they're saying is vital. But what most of us are saying all day, not vital. Okay, this is the challenge that we all have to solve. Do I have any questions so far? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. Is this the same as the 4 core points? The 4-point matter?
It's basically a graphic that shows you what that looks like. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, there are some clients that'll get up to 6 points. I usually, if it looks really important or it's not already being said, I'll say, okay, let's do it. But usually, I try to not do it because the biggest problem is, and this is a pro tip. Usually when I'm doing this, well, I have it all memorized, my messaging, but I also have an acronym for the talk points that I develop. So every one of your speakers has to be able to always remember these. Now, they can put them in their own words, no problem. But you need something that's going to cause everyone, your board members, your employees, whomever it is, to remember. So using an acronym to kind of keep you on message is important. And the scary part is I do this in my own life too. But we have a lot of important conversations in our own lives too. I mean, at least sometimes, I want to make sure if I'm talking to my daughter about if she's quitting her job or not, or if she's breaking up her marriage or not, that I'm not all over the place, that I'm being succinct and responsible as her parent. So the challenges we all have to solve is, what is it that matters and how do we get there? What is it that matters is what matters to your audience, not what matters to you. Now hopefully you're going to agree on the same things that matter. But if you're talking about cutting the grass and your audience is most concerned about the grass being green and you're most concerned about the grass being short, you need to message to what their concern is. So you could probably talk about short and green, but their part needs to be in there. Ensure that the cause, issue, or statement, and ensure that you resonate. Resonating means that it makes sense to them, they're shaking their head, they hear you, they're going to go along with you. So resonating is a slightly higher order than what matters. Resonating is when they're starting to feel it and they're going to buy in. When movements are creative, that created things are starting to resonate. If we look at political rallies and things are resonate when everyone's clapping and pretty involved. Again, communications is two-way. Third, and important, listen hard. We're all terrible listeners. I will ask people to repeat if I didn't hear it. I take a lot of notes. It is really important to listen, and I think everyone thinks that talking is communicating. Well, listening is hearing, communicating. Another one of Bill Clinton's favorite things to say was, I hear you. I think he actually did, though. I think that he actually listened pretty hard. I think that's why he was probably so successful as a politician. Modulate, modify, and move forward. What that means is the first messaging you develop is not necessarily going to be right or the best. It's just not. Sometimes it takes us a little while to get there. So you need to be pretty flexible about, once you've really heard from people and you're starting to feel what they feel, that you're flexible enough that you can fix things a little bit. If you go out initially with drastically wrong message points, it's not the end of the world. You can fix that. And that happens to everybody. Communications pathways. This is just to illustrate that you're essentially planting and growing a tree. And once it gets up and out beyond you, when you do it right, you can see it all around you. And you do start to notice it. When you notice it the best is when you hear others or hear of others who are saying things just the way you put it out there. And that's a great feeling when that happens. In my house, that's when my husband starts taking credit for something that was my idea. But we all know that there are people in our lives we need to message if we want things to go a certain way. So if you're going on that trip and he says, it's a great idea, I planned this trip, but you were the one who really wanted to go there, well, you still got it done. Okay, we're going to talk about the personal path for a minute. And this is basically how you create a call to action. Now, I'm assuming we all want to create calls to action. We want people to do something. We want them to write a check. We want them to vote. We want them to shop. We want them to buy. We want them to stay home from work, whatever it is. Here's what we need to remember. This all kind of, with us, when we're developing it, it's an intellectual exercise. It's happening up here. You might feel it in your heart, but thinking through it is here. And then it goes into your heart. And then it creates your highest hopes. And then if you're doing it right, the tone resonates. Now, tone is important too, and tonality is important. There are some people that might think that Bernie Sanders' yelling tone is working. And that may work for his base. But it's important that you understand the tonality that you're using and that it matches your organization and that your audience responds to it. And for every organization, that's going to be a little bit different. And then it becomes personal. It becomes personal when you get all that right with your audience. Getting a little warm. And if you're really lucky, you're then able to create a movement. And that's kind of the highest order of proper messaging. And frankly, Bernie Sanders has done an amazing job at creating a movement. I mean, he truly has. Whether we agree with him or not, that's something that he's done well and frankly was able to resurrect after quite a while. It's important to know that you are the message, and now I'm going to name someone who none of us, I don't imagine any of us like. The vision worked, unfortunately. But he used to say a few things. One was that people will make up their decision about you and your organization within the first 7 seconds. And that's absolutely true. It's not that you can't move them after that, but that's the best time. It's like it's easier to teach a kid to swim when they're little than when they're 12 years old. So you are the message. It's your organization plus you plus your public audience. I mean, that's how it works. So Ailes, I don't know who gets the proceeds now from his book, but his book, You Are the Message, actually probably has the best messaging and delivery of messaging tactics and strategies in any book I've ever seen. And this is not an endorsement for Roger Ailes. It's just saying the guy really knew how to do it. So let's talk about the audience for a minute. At the top, you've got the audience and the general public. And that's absolutely everybody. And then you have adjacent parties. And those are,
It's fine, it's a doorbell.
Okay, we're not on a fire drill.
You get used to it.
We did. I know, I'm thinking, do we have to evacuate now? The adjacent parties, and that's kind of all these people and organizations floating around. And then you go down to, across the bottom, and these are important, you've got your key stakeholders. If you're a politician, this is a voter. You've got the media. The media is a key stakeholder with every single one of us who are trying to do any kind of cause. And then you have new publics, those you're trying to leverage. I will tell you with the media, and I'm not doing a deep dive on media relations today, but if anyone wants to talk about it offline, we certainly can. The media is a hugely discerning audience that you have to message extremely tightly to. They will get carried away if you don't. I forever have people saying to me, why did I get him this press release, and why did I talk to her like this, and why did she come away with this thing instead? Generally, it's your fault. generally you've said or done something that is inconsistent with everything else. That you have to stay extremely tight on messaging with the media. And my one-on-one disclaimer is, a lot of reporters are friends of mine. I have a huge amount of respect for the media. I spent a ton of time with them in my career. But most of them, I do have friends in the media, but I'm really careful about who they are. Media generally, especially if you don't deal with them on a regular basis, you'll feel like you're friends with them. But they're doing a job and you're doing a job, and it's important to remember. I have a lot of people saying, but you seem like such a good guy, I'm gonna call him, we're gonna have coffee. I'm thinking, he doesn't wanna have coffee with you. And that was a strategy. The brain impact, we're gonna talk about psychology and communications. I'm also an organizational psychologist, that's workplace psychology. And the reason that matters is psychology is a big part of communications. And by that, it's really trying to have as deep a psychological understanding of what your public and the audience is going through. An example of this is, I have a client that we're getting ready to do a media pitch on. And they've got some really good things to share, really good stuff, really impressive. But psychologically, we can look at the current world right now. And today, there's two things that are being written about: coronavirus and the Democratic primaries. And no one is really interested in hearing about much else. Maybe a few sports scores, maybe that. But what I say to them is, psychologically, you're not in the right space right now. This is not, I know you're really excited about this, but this is not what anyone else is going to be excited about. In fact, it might even look irresponsible. So that's important. The same way, I'll tell you the one psychological thing, this is a really minor one, but, so, Facebook is a combination of politics, corona, and then some happy things. But then you go to the way happy things, which are people on vacations having really good times. And I was down south with my daughter last weekend, and I posted pictures. I was thinking psychologically, this is probably not a nice thing for me to do, that we're out here having a good time while the world's going crazy. So I posted it, but I probably shouldn't have. I think this weekend's even worse though, if anyone's planning to do really good things this weekend. But I guess the point is that we have to kind of assess who's out there and psychologically how we're thinking through it and how it's going to be received. I also, when I can't decide, comedians are interesting to watch on communications too, because like Stephen Colbert, he's really good. He gets issues going while he's funny at the same time. But he's even having a hard time being funny about some of this stuff. They're an interesting barometer though, because the good ones, Trevor Noah, same way. And why can't I remember the guy who's on news this week? John Oliver. John Oliver's good too. So let's talk about dollars and reality. So you're all nonprofits. So you're not going to go out and buy bus benches. You're probably not going to buy billboards. You're probably not going to buy TV. You're probably not going to buy radio. That stuff is all obscenely expensive. So we need to talk about how to be heard and money. So we're going to talk about this as if we really don't have any money to spend. And I work with a lot of folks who don't have any money to spend, but they still need the public to be engaged with what they're doing. So let's say you don't have any. You should use social media and the free platforms. We've talked about that. And you should be across all social media. You shouldn't post again more than 3 times a day, but you should be out there. You also need to make sure, if you're putting this on Twitter, you shouldn't put something totally different on Instagram. It needs to be consistent. The public attention span is extremely short. You're only going to get through them when you're saying the same thing, the same way, messaging across every platform. The time that you start getting bored with it is when they're finally hearing it. And that's a hard thing for people to understand. If you're bored with it, if you're tired of hearing it, they're just starting to buy in. You need to create ambassadors, and these are anyone with whom you're in contact who's into what you're doing needs to be one of your people out there walking and talking. If you think again about it in politics, it's like the canvassers, that they're actually out there, they're out in the world doing it. And they don't have to be doing it in a structured way. They just have to be prepared to go to a picnic at their neighbor's house and say, hey, there's this great organization I work with, Community Shares, and they do this, this, and this, and this. And this is why I love them. That's what I'm talking about. They don't have to be official, but believe me, these people can be helpful, because the biggest endorsement any organization or cause anyone gets is from word of mouth. And it's from hearing it from someone they trust. So that's important. Again, tap into what matters to your public. And once you do all these things, resources are going to be encouraged to be let loose to come to you. That doesn't mean you're all of a sudden going to get $1 million random donation, but it means that people are going to start to be more willing to open up their checkbooks, their resources, what it is they have that they can give you. How am I doing on time? Okay. Everything communicates, and by this I'm going to talk about consistency. This means your logo, your words, your public presentation, where you and your organization hang out, with whom you associate. Every single thing is some kind of communications. And if you think about it like someone you're getting to be friends with, but then you meet the people she knows and you don't like them, that's kind of what we all go through when we're making a decision. So when we're making a decision to be involved with a movement, I mean, if you're looking at Bernie Sanders, you're saying, I don't like the way the Bernie Bros act. He might say I'm actually in this debate with one of my children, because she's in that age group where she's into everything about it, and we have to have a conversation about, but let's talk about these actions, and that is largely how a lot of us make decisions. It's not just based on the main cause, it's based on who the main cause is, quote, in bed with. Your message paths, the paths you pick, communicate about you, and again, leveraging your networks. And by your networks, these are really your people. These are the people you can count on. Remember who you are, what you do, and why you matter. Always. It's always about you and your organization. And you sometimes have to remind yourself of this, because we all have days where we think, what I'm doing doesn't matter. I'm not helping anyone, I'm not doing enough, but you have to be able to push beyond that. You need to be purpose-driven, and I'm not speaking of this in a religious way, but religious organizations certainly do it really well. They're able to articulate a purpose and when I was in graduate school, I studied quite a bit on purpose-driven psychology. Clergy are, I don't want to put them in the same category as politicians, but they're really, really good at making whatever it is they want their congregation to understand purposeful. And you need to do that too. Who you are and what you demonstrate is what the public sees. What you do needs to matter to the planet, and that should be what matters to all of us. You know, I don't even know, are the religious shows on anymore? Remember there used to be a lot of religious shows and networks? I was in the cable TV business when it was really big, like the Christian Word Network. I don't even know if any of them exist anymore. But if any of that's still out there, if you watch some of the people on there, they're really good at this delivery. I honestly don't remember. There were a bunch of...
I don't have cable anymore, and I don't think a lot of people do.
I don't either.
I
And there
know
was
Jim Baker's back.
There is, well, frankly, he's good. There was a Catholic network that used to go after me because they thought I worked for an industry that was ruining America. And they might have been right, but leverage your networks. And your networks are your believers. Those are your believers. This happens through rapid and reliable communications. So they have to trust your communications, and it happens through authenticity. Now let's talk about rapid for a minute. I keep going back to the coronavirus, but I can't help it. This coronavirus messaging has not been happening in a rapid fashion. We see a lot of it now, but if you think back to the beginning, it's important if you're in a crisis, and I'll talk about the crisis just for a minute, that your communication really isn't rapid, that you really got it out there quickly. You're gonna lose your opportunity to communicate if you don't. Not that we're not all still listening to the World Health Organization and the CDC, because I keep going into it thinking I'm gonna learn something new every time. You know, you're gonna be able to tell me that we're gonna be able to stop it. But it is important to get out there rapidly. Not on the day-to-day stuff per se, but on the big things. In 2020, there was a cult leader, or this is 2020, but in the 90s there was a cult leader who said, we'll not squander our time here. Now more than ever, people focus on what makes their hearts beat. Now this guy was a cult leader by the name of Poe Bronson, and he was cultish in this strange Silicon Valley sense. But what's important now is no one's willing to squander their time. We are dealing in a world of millennials who've been handed kind of a bad world by some people in my generation. And what they care about is their quality of life and what makes their heartbeats and what makes their lives good. And we all need to remember that with messaging, because that's a huge cohort we're dealing with right now. Okay, we talked about word of mouth for a minute. Word of mouth is most powerful, period. Your word of mouth people are your employees. Everyone who works for you, that's a person who should be messaging for you. Everyone on your board, and then the people who become your public, your followers, you know who they are. Influencers are people from, they're the movie stars, they're the people you see on commercials, they're the people who can buy and sell products and get everyone driving this kind of car. Every sale or every cause has influencers, even yours. And these are the people who will live or die for what you're doing, and they're the real deal. And it's important that you leverage these people. And it is usually, in a city of Cincinnati, what you'd look at are there people affiliated with me who have a big base themselves, like they hold public office, they have a certain kind of job. I mean, we're not looking necessarily for Usher to be our influencer, because he's not going to pick up some cause in Cincinnati. Well, maybe he will. Although the organization, I will tell you that one of mine that ended up on public radio is this organization Transform, and they've gotten some very famous influencers, and that's been for a number of reasons. That's highly unusual. It's helped them raise a lot of money. It's highly unusual. So I wouldn't set your sights on that, but there are a lot of important influencers who are in your neighborhood, who are around here, and it's a matter of leveraging them. We're going to talk about philanthropy plus cause. This is a pint of Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's ice cream in their early days was just owned by Ben & Jerry as a small enterprise by two guys in Vermont who wanted some kind of organic food. Now they are owned by a multinational conglomerate, and so we're going to talk about the original Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's really early on decided they wanted to be cause related, that they wanted to save the rainforest. And this is on their packaging. The reason I bring this up is that affinity hugely drove sales for them. But if you can find a way, you to be the cause for someone who is in the for-profit sector, who wants to partner with you, it's a great way to bolster your organization in many, many ways. Hard to do, and I doubt they even set out, well, I have studied them. They didn't set out, they never thought, Celestial Seasonings is the same way from Colorado. They were out picking organic flowers and making tea. None of these guys really thought, they were high school dropouts. This wasn't trying to be rich and sold off to Haagen-Dazs. They really cared about the rainforest. There are organizations out there for profit making something who are like that. Can I tell you exactly where they are? No, but can I say keep your eyes open? Yes. Do you have friends who are working for them? You probably do. You just probably haven't thought about it that way. Planned Parenthood needs someone who's doing a lot of pink.
Yeah.
Live Strong. Lance Armstrong has a terrible image right now, but he didn't always. I worked a lot with the guy who developed Live Strong for him. And Live Strong was the first organization that did the bracelet, the rubber bracelet, yellow. And Lance Armstrong in those days, I think Lance Armstrong's probably a really good guy from what I've heard. He just kind of got into some hot water. And by today's standards, anything he did doesn't seem all that bad. But the reason I bring this up, he probably was most successful at creating a movement around a cause and by really heavy, consistent branding. And I encourage you to kind of look into that. There's a lot of case studies on it. So we'll talk about branding for a minute. Branding's usually important. By branding, it's pretty simple. Your branding, even if you have little money to brand with, should be keeping it consistent. That's your logo, your name, your tagline, and it needs to be on all your swag and walking around. It needs to be on people. There's a lot of, Planned Parenthood nationally does a ton of it. All over the place. They have more resources than a lot of organizations do. They just do. But it's important that your branding, that you don't miss an opportunity to brand, that you're taking advantage of all that. So we're going to talk about meaning making for a minute. I also spent a lot of time studying about meaning making. And meaning making is about taking whatever it is you do, and I'm using Bernie as the example, whatever it is you do and making it meaningful to the public. And that again is understanding the public, so what you are going to say is going to be something in their life that is meaningful to them. There's a ton of research right now, again around the millennials, that shows that millennials are not living their lives and going to work for money, but they're trying to have a meaningful experience. And my daughters, I will tell you just about every time I talk to them, talk about if their work is meaningful. Yeah, they want to be able to pay their bills, and frankly, I want them to pay their bills. But is their work meaningful? Young people are at the center of this. I don't think it's going to change. I don't think they're all of a sudden going to become so financially driven that meaning doesn't matter to them. And time in life matters the most. Quality of life and time. And I think, frankly, after this thing blows through, whenever it does, it's going to be even more so. All of a sudden we're going to feel that we took a lot of things for granted. I think we're already feeling that. I'm going to talk about Ralph Lauren for a minute. Ralph Lauren's been doing this pink pony thing forever. It's for breast cancer awareness. But he was one of the first guys to get into it. Now in October, everything's breast cancer awareness, right? But Ralph Lauren was really early. The same guy I worked with on Livestrong did develop pink pony for Ralph Lauren. And the reason I bring this up is it's an Uber example, but it's another example. Again, looking at the case studies on this is interesting, of finding someone or something that's going on out there, a chain of restaurants. It can be lots of different things that might just, you might have a friend who works for a restaurant chain who knows that the owner of that chain really cares about autism. And Autism Speaks. Can you go to them and can you do something together where they're helping you? And if you're not doing this already, it's important just to think about your networks in these terms, because you'd be kind of surprised. A for-profit plus a cause equals affinity. Affinity is an extremely high level of resonating. The other thing I'll tell you that the for-profits don't like you to know is it really helps their sales when they're affiliating. Rainforest has been a big thing about the success of Ben & Jerry's. This is pure and simple. You're going to take a risk. You're gonna go where you have support. We talked about that. That's where you're going first. You're gonna then request support, you know this. You're gonna then secure buy-in, and then you're gonna develop new paths. By taking a risk, I mean going places you haven't gone before with your messaging, new places. Again, the message, it's the message, your message, and who you are. Okay, here we have, this is my t-shirt from 2008 that I bought in Denver. I think that quote is interesting how on it still is right now. But Barack Obama created a movement, and he built a movement from the ground up. And Yes We Can is another example of probably one of the best movements ever created that got him into the White House. And he was kind of on the front end of all this in politics. If you remember back, and I think everyone is old enough to remember this election, he was just he and his campaign were very good at connecting to people. I mean, we see the whole Bernie Sanders send $5. Well, Obama that's kind of what he was doing in the early days.
I think George Bush tried to do that with 1,000 points of light, which
No one understood it.
Yeah, I mean, it should have 1,000 points of light. It sounds very lofty and hopeful, but yet it just sounded flat.
He was not a good retail politician.
No.
I'm kind of missing him now a little bit, but he wasn't a great retail politician. But it is the same concept.
Yeah.
But folks who are good in it. But I mean, Yes We Can. He got it all going. But if you remember back, Yes We Can got going really early. It wasn't something that just came when he was president. It came early in the campaign. Okay, we're going to talk about the why for a minute. We're going to talk about the why because the why has been this hugely successful organization at creating branding and meaning making everywhere, even though they're really, and I'm a Y member, but I mean, they're a physical fitness facility now. Having said that though, a lot of people have a huge amount of respect for who the Y was originally, how they became the Y, what they were about. There's a really good feeling about that. So when you join the Y, the gym, and you pay your $53 a month, which is how much I think it is, you feel like you're becoming part of something that's a lot bigger than, hey, I'm a member of an organization that's really doing a lot more for the world than me just having a place to go work out. Even though really what it is these days is a place to work out. And we're going to talk about metrics for a minute while we're on the why. The why has been they've done a lot about measuring all of their impact, which is probably a lot about why they turned into what they did. They were getting the most impact out of and the most dollars out of their physical fitness component rather than some of what they originally did. It is important, and metrics are something that is big corporate speak, but that you're doing what you can to measure the impact that you're having on the world and on your own constituencies. And these days with social media, that's a little bit easier to message. It's also sadly easy to message through what dollars you're getting coming in, what your event attendance looks like. How often do you see people wearing your swag out there? What do people know about you? And to get to the place where you can check all those boxes takes time, so don't anyone beat themselves up about that. It does take a tremendous amount of time. You need to be out there for a while doing this. There is nothing in this that's quick fix. I cannot tell a client that, by next month everyone's going to know who you are, because that is just not true. I don't care what you use. You could buy up every major Google word that you need, and it still takes a while. Media cares about the metrics. Media is calling the people with the biggest metrics because they're hearing about them. They pay attention to who's done it well. Time in the market helps. You also don't give up. It's kind of like quitting a bad habit. A week's gone by and nothing's happened, so you're gonna say, I'm done. You need to just, you've got to just stay with it. Persistence is really important. Marry what you do to the public concern. If I were a company that was producing something that could help coronavirus who no one's using yet, I sure would be out there talking about it a whole lot right now. I wish someone would come forward who's doing that. And again, look at the why and how they've morphed over time. I mean, frankly, just go read their history and then look at what they are now. It's pretty fascinating. Doing good means doing well. I'm telling you, having been inside a corporation for a long time, that corporations want to be seen as doing good, and you all do things well and make the world better. So again, this is another, you can be part of the doing good and doing well sentiment. Mission on good needs to be clear and needs to be everywhere. Okay, building a network. This is a bunch of people eating ice cream cones. This is just to illustrate, if that ice cream, if your cause was ice, this is sad, it's the second ice cream I've had in this presentation. If you were to say, if you were ice cream and you see everyone eating the ice cream cones, you're everywhere, you've done it. Bill Clinton, let's go back to him for a minute. Bill Clinton was the guy who started out talking about a place called Hope, Arkansas. I wish I could say that I still thought about that every time I saw him now on TV, but I don't. But that worked for him for a long period of time. Again, that was core messaging. Throughout the time that he was most popular, he was still talking about, I hear you in a place called Hope. Oprah Winfrey has probably done the best of anyone you could name at branding cross-population. And she did this in the way you can do once you've achieved as an organization a certain amount of success. She said, yeah, I'm gonna get into book clubs. And yeah, I'm gonna talk about diets. And she had a whole list, and she's been able to impact all of these industries. The reason I bring her up is because she also, there are not many constituents, whether age, race, gender, you won't find people out there who don't know what she's doing or don't applaud it. I mean, she's a hugely popular woman. The reason Oprah Winfrey matters for this is because she is an example of what it looks like when you can get into the space of starting to launch other things about you and what you're doing across the population. This is the Talking Heads. The reason they're in there is because they have a song called Same As It Ever Was that I noticed, by the way, after I did my presentation, that David Byrne must have had on Saturday Night Live the other day. He's come out after being dormant for quite a while. The reason I say this is because none of this has changed. If we went back 200 years and we were talking about this, we'd still be saying the same things, except there wouldn't be a social media platform. But there wouldn't be TV, but we'd still be saying the same things. But we'd be scrolling it in, on the side of a building. I mean, we still have buildings around Cincinnati with things on the side of the buildings. That's how the communications was occurring. Picking the right pathways. You need to pick where you're going to message. And I'm not saying you're going to go out and buy TV, but you can get on TV through earned media. Earned media is public relations. It's calling the news director and getting a press release over and saying, we have something that's going to make everyone's grass green in Cincinnati all year. It's never going to be brown. If you can do that, you have your press release now, you can get on TV. Getting on the radio, again, earned media, not buying it. It's not as hard as you think. There's a lot of radio in town who is perfectly willing to talk about the good things happening. The first one that comes to mind is National Public Radio's, Cincinnati Public Radio's program that's on at noon with Michael Monks. Lincoln Ware does a lot. I mean, there's more going on out there than anyone thinks. Print, same way. There is still print, but it's still out there. And by the way, it's still considered the most It's considered the most credible news, still is. Online, social, mobile, and happenstance. Happenstance is kind of the things that happen to you accidentally. And last but not least, and maybe most important, is through your ambassadors. You need to modulate your words. The source determines the tone. The same actual words can be unique in their delivery, but try to use the same words when you can. Again, listen. Anytime you're talking with anyone, make sure that you are breathing enough. And I haven't asked you guys if you have any questions yet. Everyone's just make sure you're listening. What makes you different? It's important you're differentiated. There may be a cause up the street that you feel is doing the exact same thing that you do. For example, what's the difference between the United Way and community shares? It's important that you are able to talk about your organization in a way that you see that you are and able to say that you're different, that you're unique, that you're special. Your cause, your words, your sincerity, and you should do it in less than 60 seconds. I know that's a tall order, but it can be done. It is the elevator speech. For-profits need you. Excuse me. They have issues. They need consumers, and you need to make them better. People these days really want to buy from organizations that are making the world a better place. It's really important right now, and I think it's going to continue to be more important. I mean, my daughters who have limited resources will talk about that they're going to buy this instead of this because Tom's Shoes is doing this. And you're going to start to hear that more and more. It's always been true, but it's super true right now. Measure what moves metrics. Your audience, your influence, and your innate goodness. And if you're sitting in this room, you're doing something good. All of this ultimately does create a battle cry, and it creates a battle cry for you. Paying to be heard in the right venue helps. This means that if you can afford, and I'm not shilling marketing, but if you have a budget, a small one, for marketing opportunities, you need to pick right, but it does help to create the battle cry. Food for the soul. There's a guy named Warren Bennis. He was president of the University of Cincinnati in the 70s. He ended up leaving here and writing a ton of really popular books on leadership and his kind of gospel. He wrote a book called Geeks to Geezers. It was a great book. He only died recently. He ended up living in San Diego. I mean, he was a huge free spirit. And he said early on when he wrote this book that geeks of today believe that doing good works. That's me, and that's how to find me. That's it. I don't know how long I